This is the Steep website at steep.app. The first thing I quite like is the simple visual style that's accented with these hand-drawn sort of sprinkle elements. So you can see some of these lines are almost shaky, as if they've been drawn by hand. These outlines have gaps in them, and you get that throughout the website. That's quite a nice contrast with the otherwise quite mechanical style. So you've got these straight edges around containers. You've got the screenshots, obviously, which feel quite mechanical. And so this is quite a nice way to throw in some contrast with the extra elements you add and make the whole thing feel a bit more visually interesting. I like that it's also mirrored by the typeface combination they've chosen, which is this serif font plus the sans serif font. So the sans serif font matches the sort of more mechanical visual style you see around the website, and then the serif font, it's a bit more sort of visually complex, it's a bit more organic. That pairs nicely with this idea of these more sort of shaky, more visually interesting sprinkles. So I like that there's this typeface combination that sort of matches the overall approach they're using to the visual style. One small thing I noticed is that they've got this centered hero section. So you've got the title in the center, then this text and the image. So this whole hero section is centered in the middle. And then you've also got this centered Steep logo at the top. Often you see that on the left-hand side when you go to a website, and then the navigation items in the middle or over here by the main call to action. But here they've centered it all, so you get this nice through line when you first look at the website. Because after all, this logo relates most directly to the tagline they've got and the description of the platform. So they've kept that all centered to make sure that that connection is sort of maintained visually. One thing I quite liked about this container down here was that they've got these hand-drawn illustrations of flowers, but they haven't put any color into the flowers themselves or the plants themselves. They've given the whole background of the container the color. So you've got these plants down here that would normally be green if they were in color, and then instead of that, they've made the container itself green. And I like this because it's quite a nice pairing between the container and the contents. So they haven't just had a sort of grey container with green plants. They've put in a black and white illustration of plants and then carried that concept across to the container itself and made it green. So this is quite a nice way to make it all feel quite coherent, but also keep it simple, because if you'd added color to these illustrations and added color to the container, for example, it'd be a bit more visually complex. I also quite like that in this green container, they've made the text here this sort of green-grey color. So it's not a flat grey like you'd see up here, for example. They've made it match the container color itself a bit more. So that makes it, again, feel even more coherent and gives this whole container quite a nice feeling. Speaking of color, basically the approach they've taken on the website is that the structure itself and all of the text mostly is in black and white, and they've reserved color for other things like illustrations. One of the good things in this case, if you do this approach, is that you don't need a lot of color for it to be effective, because almost everything's black and white or shades of gray. Suddenly any color in your illustrations, your products here, for example, is going to stand out that much more. Any colors in logos, this whole section, you don't need a particularly heavy color or bold color to make something stand out. This is a relatively light color, and this makes the container stand out massively compared to the content around it. Same with these illustrations down here. This is a really bold red for this website, and it's that much more effective because everything else is black and white. So suddenly your color can be more effective. You can use less of it. You can be more intentional about it. So that's quite a nice approach, and it's quite striking when done correctly. Moving down here to the final call to action, you can see a lot more of this color. You know, the areas that are colourful are drawing you in, they're pulling your eye towards them, just because they stand out so much compared to the rest of it. So you can use these illustrations to essentially highlight or draw attention to important content. Same here, you can see that this grid, they've got these light greys, and they haven't had to use particularly strong colour to make this yellow container and this green container stand out that much more. So coming down here to this final call to action, there's this door animation illustration, which I quite like. It's relatively simple and it matches the visual style because it's black and white, so it's quite effective with how much it uses. But it also matches the concept quite well. So first of all, this opening door is quite sort of inviting. You wonder what's through there. You're seeing this sort of sparkling white on black field. They're probably stars, for example, behind the door. And so that's very mysterious, and you sort of want to see what's back there. It suggests that there's quite sort of magical or mystical things going on if you sign up. But also, in a much more simple sense, the door just represents this concept of getting started, right? You're walking through the door to start on your journey with Steep. So on several different levels, it's sort of reinforcing this idea of getting started. And it's doing it in quite a sort of charming and effective way because it's this animated illustration. They could have done something much simpler, maybe a flat illustration or maybe just a closed door, that sort of thing. But this way there, I think the effect is more than the sum of its parts. I also wanted to point out that the structure of this final call to action with the centered illustration, the centered title, the centered sort of subtitle and these two buttons matches the structure of this first call to action. So you've got the centered title, the centered subtitle, and the centered call to actions. It's the same format essentially, top and bottom, and that's a nice way to round off the website because you're essentially saying here's the start, here's the end. It lets someone, I mean obviously they can't scroll any further, but it lets someone know that they've reached the end because you're echoing the first thing they saw with the last thing they see.